What I'm about to share with you will benefit you tremendously, okay? You will save money, you'll have less stress, and you will have a lot more clarity about whether or not buying a home in the country is the right move for you. See, I've lived in the country for as long as I can remember, doing all of the things that you can think of with country living, like cutting firewood, tending to the garden, taking care of your land and your animals, like these chickens that are running around. Okay, when I was growing up, we had dogs and cats and horses and pigs and all the things, even a turtle named Pokey. But I'll warn you, it is not for everyone, okay? I've seen a lot of people try it out and move right back to the city because they had no idea what they were getting themselves into. So I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen to you by giving you some critical advice for buying a home in the country. We'll cover all of the topics that you need to know about, like wells and septic systems, and what you can or can't do with your land, and how to keep your home from burning down, and what you need in case of an emergency. And I'm going to also share with you the one thing that makes more people reverse course, sell that country home, and move right back into the city, okay? And that's all coming up right now, so let's get into it. So a nice country home is really the dream of many, many Americans, especially ones who spent their life in the city, in the hustle and bustle, with the noise and the people and the stress, and I just cringe just thinking about it. But the dream of just a simpler, laid-back country life is very, very real. And it's especially real since all the lockdowns and restrictions that people had to endure during the pandemic. Those small city lots got a lot smaller when you weren't allowed to leave them, okay? And that got a lot of people thinking, man, wouldn't it be nice if I just had, a little place out in the country, an acre or two of my own, a little room for a garden, for a lawn, to throw the ball for the dog or for the kids to run around and play in. Okay, that is the dream of many, many people. I mean, who hasn't watched an episode of Yellowstone and then immediately started looking up property in Montana? It's a real thing. People fall in love with the idea of country living, and it's really a great way of life, but it is absolutely not for everyone, and it may not be for you. But I'm going to tell you, it is very, very costly if you move out into the country and then you move back into the city and you have to reverse course, okay? Especially if you're dragging your family through it and your kids are switching schools and you're switching jobs, all that. It can be very, very costly financially and emotionally, and it's completely avoidable if you just have a better idea of what it's like to live in the country before you actually live in the country. And that's what we're going to cover in this video. So the first thing that you need to understand about country living is the utilities, right? If you're living in the city, you're probably used to simply writing a check every month and having your public water and sewer and trash and power and gas and all that delivered with no second thought required, right? It's convenient. There's basically no maintenance. But when you have a home in the country, that is definitely not the case, okay? Most country homes have a well to get water. Some have a spring or have water rights to a creek or the river, but most of them have a well. That's the most common by far, right? And a well requires a well pump and a pressure tank and probably, in most cases, some sort of water filtration system or a water softener. And those all require maintenance by a professional, usually on an annual basis, to ensure they continue to function properly. And if you've never had a well, the idea of it can be fairly intimidating. And here's two things that I hear very frequently from folks who haven't had a well before. The first is that they're concerned about the need of having to drill a new well someday. Okay, what if the well goes dry? Well, a well is simply a hole in the ground, really, if you're going to simplify it. And holes in the ground last a pretty long time, okay? So unless the aquifer beneath it goes dry, or there's some sort of event that causes the whole well itself to collapse, the risk of those things happening is very, very low, okay? The second thing I hear a lot regarding a well is simply the amount of water that you need, right? People think they need some big, high-producing well so that they can have good water pressure. That's not how it works, okay? Water pressure is produced from the pressure tank, and you can set that to your liking, all right? But the well flow and the water purity are both very, very important things to know. So my advice here simply is to ensure that you get a well flow test done and a water purity test done before you buy a home in the country. And then talk to them about the results, okay? Have them explain to you, what does the static water level mean? Have them explain to you, what does it mean that the well flow test started at 20 gallons a minute and it went down to 5 in the first half an hour? What does that mean to you as a person owning the property? And that's very, very important to have a good understanding of those things. Another very important thing to know about having a well is that your well pump needs power to work. So if you lose power, which is fairly common during winter storms or even times of high fire danger, then you could be without water. And if you're without water, then you're not flushing toilets, you're not showering, and you're probably not doing a whole lot of cooking. It can be pretty impactful. So the advice here is simply to make sure that you understand this and that you plan accordingly, okay? Consider a whole home generator or even a whole home battery backup system if you're in an area that is prone to longer, outages and stuff. And the more rural you get, the more that tends to be the case. So at the very least, make sure that you have, a couple days worth of water in some big jugs, maybe in your garage, to have on standby in case of an emergency. Hey, sorry to interrupt the video, but I just want to make sure you know that you can reach out to me directly if there's anything I can do to help you learn, buy, or list real estate here in Southern Oregon by simply calling or texting me at 541-954-7758, which is my direct cell phone number. And it is never too early to start the conversation. So if you're a few months out or even a year or two out, it is not too early to start talking and to start planning, okay? So please don't hesitate to reach out. I look forward to hearing from you. And now back to the video. Now, if you have a country home and you don't have public water, then you probably don't have public sewer either. And that means that you have to have an on-site septic system. Well, what the heck is that? It's probably one of the most misunderstood things about country living. It definitely can be more intimidating if you're not very familiar with them. A septic system essentially is a system that just holds back all of the wastewater and sewage from your home, okay? And it slowly releases the wastewater into the ground, and it holds back any of the solids, which then need to be pumped out every couple of years, depending on the size of your system and the amount of usage. But similar to the wells, the key here is to just really understand the septic system before you buy the home, okay? So make sure you have it looked at by a professional, that the seller generally should pay for the system to be pumped, and then you as a buyer would pay to have it inspected by a professional. And they'll tell you, what does it look like? What type of system is it? Does the tank look good? Do the leach lines look good? What kind of maintenance needs to be done and when? All those sorts of things. Make sure you have a very good understanding of the septic system and what it entails before you buy a country home. Now, something that's pretty popular in homes in the country is natural gas or propane, okay? And this is because of the power outage situation that I mentioned previously. If you have natural gas or propane for your heat source or for your oven and your hot water heater, or even to power a whole home generator, then you're not as reliant on the power company. And that's something that's very important to know. So having that gas or propane as a backup is never a bad idea, and something that I'm sure you'd be pretty happy you considered. One of the biggest fears I hear from people thinking about moving into the country is all about wildfires, and for good reason. With the amount of wildfires that we're seeing on the western United States, fire danger is something on the minds of everyone who's living in the country, but it doesn't have to be something that scares you. It's just something that you need to understand. So if you live in the country, my advice to you is to really make sure that you understand what is called defensible space, okay? And that you create defensible space around your home. And what that means is generally removing all dry grass, removing leaves and brush and those sorts of things within 100 feet of your home. And that includes limbing your trees up, making sure there's no limbs within 6 feet of the ground, and that your trees are spaced apart more than 10 feet, those sorts of things, okay? There's a lot of great information about defensible space in a video that I'll include a link to down in the description of this one. It's from the Oregon State Fire Marshal, and they talk about all of their suggestions about the amount of space and what you ought to do with your property to ensure that you're mitigating the risk of wildfire. Another thing that's really important to do before buying a home in the country is really to understand where the property lines are of the property that you're buying, okay? You might be thinking that it should be obvious, right? There's a fence right over there and that should be the line, okay? No, not always, right? And especially not in the country. Fences and cross fences are very, very common and oftentimes not on the property line. So never assume that a fence line is the property line. So if you really want to know where your property lines are, the best bet is to get a surveyor to locate the property corners, okay? And you shouldn't need to do a full-on property survey, but just have that surveyor locate the property corners, and that can be good enough to have you have a good sense of the shape and the location of the lines for the property that you're buying. In a lot of those cases, the seller or the neighbor will come out and they'll try to tell you, hey, the line's right over there. Don't trust them, okay? Don't take their word for it. It's important to get this right, all right? It's very, very important, because if you ever want to build a new structure or something like that, you're going to want to make sure that you're doing it within the proper setbacks of the property lines, and that all starts with knowing exactly where those lines are so that you don't get in trouble with the county. And speaking of getting in trouble with the county, it's really important to know what you can and cannot do with your property. There's all sorts of different types of zoning classifications that vary by county. So You might have rural residential and exclusive farm use and forest resource and more, and they all have different rules. So it's very important to know those rules so that you know how close, to the property line you can build your shed, or what types of animals you can have on your property and how many of them. Okay, so you want to make sure you really have a great understanding of the zoning ordinances for the property that you're considering buying. And now the big one, okay, the one thing that causes more people to sell the country home, to give up on the dream and head back to the city, that one thing is, bar none, the work. Having a couple acres instead of a couple tenths of an acre is very different. If you have a big lawn like this, then you're going to need a big mower. Maybe not that big. No, bigger than that. There you go. Just like that. You're going to need to have a mower like this, and it can cost you a few $1,000s. You'll also need a leaf blower. You'll need a weed eater, and you'll need all sorts of other tools to help you maintain the property. If you have a wood-burning fireplace, which is a great idea to have as an extra heat source like we talked about earlier, but if you have one, you'll need to cut firewood for it, obviously, or you'll need to buy it at the very least. But even if you buy it, you'll still need to stack it, and you'll need to go get wood when it's time to build a fire, and then you'll need to go get more when the fire is burning out. Okay, so you have to keep it going, and that's a lot of work. If you have animals, you have to feed them. You'll have to take care of them. You'll have to deal with predators like coyotes, raccoons, foxes, mountain lions, and so on. If you have a garden, you have to plant it. You have to water it, pick it, get the weeds out of it, okay? Then eat the food, or store it, or can it, or do something with the food, right? It's a lot of work owning a country home, but I'll tell you what, I would not have it any other way, okay? The peace and quiet, the privacy, the joy of being able to just sit back on your porch and watch your kids or grandkids play out in the yard, or pick vegetables from the garden, or chase the chickens around, whatever it is, right? That's what it's all about, okay? It just doesn't get any better than that. And it is worth every single ounce of effort that you pour into your property. And one more piece of advice I have for you is to check out this video right here, which is about the 5 mistakes to avoid when buying property. If you've ever thought about buying land and building a home, this is an absolute must-see video. Again, I'm Brian Simmons with eXp Realty. I thank you for watching. I'll see you on the next video.